So Nehemia, I love you, my brother.
Yeah, it's been
You.
quite a day, a very stressful day. So I was woken up this morning by my wife telling me that there are sirens have gone off and they're firing rockets at us. And I said, I just want to go back to sleep. I'm like, this, what do you, I don't know. I didn't, and I finally wake up and I pull up the Ynet, which is one of the Israeli news channels, and not only are they firing rockets at us, but we've been invaded, which is the first time Israel's been invaded, as far as I know, by anything more than a small terrorist cell, right? But an actual invasion, the first time that's happened since 1973. And as far as I know, it's the first time a civilian center has been captured by an enemy force since 1949.
Hmm.
They actually, at one point this morning, held three small towns on the border of Gaza. It's been confirmed that these Hamas terrorists have taken hostages that they've kidnapped and taken back to Gaza. There was one man on the Israeli news saying that his wife and 3-year-old daughter and 5-year-old daughter all went to visit his wife's mother in a small Jewish town on the border of Gaza. And the last he heard from her, there were terrorists that had gotten into the house. And then he lost contact, and now her phone is in Gaza. So he doesn't know if her body is in Gaza along with the phone, or if she and his 3-year-old and 5-year-old daughters have been taken hostage. We don't know. Over 100 are dead. By the time that Israel clears these terrorists out, we're probably going to be in the hundreds dead.
And the significance of this is, look, Israel is a much smaller nation than the United States. So when we lost over 3,000 on 9/11, this would be a very this would be just as devastating as just as numbers as 9/11.
Yeah, this
And this is
this
just within the
this is a
first few
9/11
hours.
scale event for Israel. That we've never had something like this happen. Not since 1973, which was the Yom Kippur War. It was a very similar situation, that it was a surprise attack on one of the Jewish holidays. That was on Yom Kippur. This was on the Feast of Sukkot, or many people today were celebrating Shmini Atzeret or Simchat Torah. It's the day when they celebrate the completion and renewal of the Torah reading cycle. And so people dance with the Torah scroll. Instead, people are being called up to the reserve units, and Israel is at war. And there was a speech from Netanyahu, the prime minister, earlier, in which he said that this is not an operation, this is an actual war. That's significant, because up until now, Israel has had lots of operations. An operation is where maybe you pull up some of the reserves and you go and you clear out and you root out some terrorists, right? But it's never been acknowledged. We had Operation Defensive Wall and Cast Lead. And look, these were wars where we went into Gaza or we went into Lebanon, but we never had the government acknowledging it was a war. We had the prime minister on the first day saying we are at war.
Hmm.
We've never been invaded in decades, and this is a big deal. They're probably, by the time they've rooted out all the terrorists, we're going to have hundreds dead, and probably 100 or more prisoners of war. But these are terrorists we're dealing with, so they're not going to be treated. They're civilians, so they're not going to be treated as prisoners. Some are soldiers, but also civilians, women, children have been taken captive, and they're going to be held by these terrorists as bargaining chips. It's bad. It's really bad. It's as bad as
So
I can't
now we
imagine a
have,
worse scenario. I guess there could be, but I guess the worst scenario is that Hezbollah, which is the
yeah,
Shiite terrorist group in Lebanon, if they get
right.
involved and they
And
open
they're sponsored by Iran.
right.
And yeah,
Well,
it'd just be
well,
interesting to
Hamas
see.
is funded by Iran, but they're not a branch of the Iranian military.
Okay,
Whereas Hezbollah is actually
right.
trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and take their orders from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, right? So Hezbollah is a branch, is a a proxy army of Iran. Hamas has an alliance with Iran, and they get funding and some training from them. but it's not as close a connection. If Hezbollah gets involved, that would be very. So I mean, here's the question I have to ask myself. So the heads of Hamas, when they launched this attack, what was their objective? They're
Right.
not going to hold long term these towns in southern Israel. We know that, right? Israel has a much more powerful military. Their objective has to be to, I think, I don't know. I think their objective probably is to draw Israel into
Draw
a
in
full-scale
to war.
invasion,
Yeah.
which is going to happen. That has to happen. And they want there to be a lot of dead Arab children, which breaks my heart. Golda Meir famously said, "One day I can forgive the Arabs for killing our boys. What I'll never be able to forgive them for is making our boys kill their boys." We don't want war. We want peace. And we're going to have to go in, and people die in war, and a lot of children are going to die. And I think that's what they want. I think they want the photos of dead Arab children so that the leaders in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia see that and say, okay, we can't make peace with Israel because there are all these dead Arab children. I think that's the objective.
Yeah, so obviously, huge breakthroughs were done, actually, interestingly enough, during the Trump administration, where a lot of serious peace treaties were signed with these Muslim majority countries and Arab countries, and it just seemed like things were heading in the right direction. One can see how terrorists would want to interfere with this process because they don't want that. They don't even want Israel. They don't even because it legitimizes Israel. Once Saudi Arabia recognizes Israel and its right to exist, then your whole cause is kind of being affected by this. So this was probably, it sounds to me, it's almost like an act of desperation on their part that they're trying to undermine these peace talks and processes going on, which is still going on even with the Biden administration. And this is a very but I guess as terrorists, this is how they would see it, right? I mean, because that's their worldview.
Well, their motto, literally the motto that's in the Hamas charter is, "We love death more than they love life."
Yeah.
They worship death. They're a death cult in some respects. Hey, Barbara. I was told to say hi to Barbara. I'm not sure who Barbara is, but hey, Barbara. They see things going towards peace, and look, so there was this crazy. I watched earlier an interview with the Hamas spokesman who was speaking to Al Jazeera, and the Al Jazeera interviewer said, how did you guys? I'm paraphrasing, of course. How did you prepare such an extensive and elaborate operation when Gaza is under Israeli occupation and controlled by Israel? And the answer is obvious. Israel doesn't control Gaza. What we do control is the maritime area around Gaza to prevent the import of rockets and heavy weapons and tanks and artillery, right? But we don't control Gaza. Gaza's controlled. In fact, we give Gaza electricity. And one of the things that they're talking about in the Israeli news media is, why hasn't the government turned off the electricity in Gaza? They get the electricity from us. Literally like this, we can turn off the electricity. It's a button. Maybe it's more. Maybe it's actually like one of those like pull down things, right? But literally, we can turn off the electricity. And why do we not do that? Because we don't want the women and children and other civilians in Gaza to suffer, right? We're at war with this terrorist regime, which has the support of the people, I guess, but we don't want the people to suffer. But what are we supposed to do? They invaded us. Right? We have to strike back. We have to strike back hard, and we have to make sure they can't invade us again. And that a lot of people are going to die. It breaks my heart. A lot of Arab civilians are going to die, and that makes me very sad.
Yeah, and as Christians out there, believers, let's keep Israel and the people of the Jewish people in our prayers. This is because there are going to be a lot of dead Arabs, but there are also going to be a lot of dead Jews.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, in light of the 20th century, what happened in Germany and in Europe, Shoah. We've seen the formation of the State of Israel shortly thereafter. It was a safe haven, a place for the Jewish people to come back to their homeland, which every year for millennia Every Passover, you would pray about returning back to your homeland.
Next year in
And
Jerusalem. Yep.
exactly. So this is part, and you also recognize that your history is one of pogroms and persecution, whether it was at the hands of Christians and the hands of all the other groups of people. That we do recognize that Christianity has had its issues. Obviously, it has a past with Israel or with the Jewish people as well. That's not always been a good thing, obviously, but now, especially in America, the Christians are very supportive of the Jewish people. And we, in many ways, have formed alliances and our friendships with the Jewish people. And Nehemia, I just want to ask, what do you have to say to the American people? Tell us, just put us in your place and tell us what would you like to share with them? Because, a lot of people they're just sitting at home watching Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and they're seeing clips on reels going, and, just going over and just seeing basically the same clips over and over again. But tell us what it's like right now, boots on the ground for you and your family.
It's surreal because I put on, like I said, some Al Jazeera and also some CNN and Fox News, and they're, at least what I saw, is they're not actually reporting a tenth of what's happening. And look, this is the cliche, but it's true. So, BBC is one of the great offenders. What they'll do is they'll say, two Palestinians killed following an earlier incident, right? Not in this situation, but I've seen this. And what's the earlier incident? Well, those two Palestinians crossed the border with AK-47s and tried to kill people, right? And so that that's following the earlier incident, right? Or they were firing rockets, and we, went in with drones or a helicopter and killed the people firing rockets. That's the earlier incident. So, but I'm really surprised that there's something called the Gell-Mann amnesia effect. Have you ever heard of that? Murray Gell-Mann was this great physicist. He was actually Jewish. He was one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century of all time. And he said, when I read the newspaper and I read something about physics, it's completely wrong. And then I turn the page and I say, oh, that's what's happening in Palestine. And that's actually the example he brought, Palestine. And he says, why do I forget from one page to the next that they mess up the story? If they mess up the story on physics, why wouldn't they mess up the story on what's going on in the Middle East or in Ukraine or in other places, right? And it's not always deliberate. A lot of times it's like pure incompetence.
Yes.
I remember one story. I have a friend who's into he's involved with water desalination.
Desalinization. Yeah.
Desalinization. And I sent him a clipping from a pretty right-wing Israeli news source that was talking about how Israel was now desalinizing like a certain amount of water, like a lot of water. And he wrote back to me, he said, that's not even the real story. The real story is that's water desalinization so they can give water to Gaza. So Israel is burning fuel to desalinize water, and this is like 10 or 15 years ago, so they can give water to Gaza. So Gaza gets its water and electricity from Israel. Not because we occupy them, but because, frankly, they're not competent enough to produce their own. Right? I mean, they could build their own power plant. Why don't they?
Right. Great question.
So
I'm sure they
have access to the ocean or the Mediterranean. They could desalinize the water as well. Why don't they? Okay, so we feel bad for them and we help them out, and this is how they respond to us. So what I want to say to the American people is we really appreciate your support. We appreciate your prayers. We may need material assistance. I don't know. I can imagine that at some point Israel will run out of Iron Dome rockets, interceptor rockets, but then we make those, so I don't know that America could help us with those. Like, how many do we have? If Hezbollah gets involved, and Hezbollah has something like 200,000 rockets that they could fire. We don't have 200,000 interceptors. I don't know. I can tell you that it's 6:20 right now here in Israel. The last rockets that were fired on Jerusalem, as far as I know, were at 11:31 a.m., something like that. We went into the shelter. We heard 5 explosions. We have a bomb shelter, right? I've actually had this apartment for where I'm sitting right now for something like 20 years or maybe over 20 years, and I've never been in the bomb shelter before. Now, the last 10 years I haven't actually lived here, to be fair. But I never even stepped foot in the bomb shelter because, who needs a bomb shelter in Jerusalem? But during one of the recent wars or encounters with Gaza, they ordered the bomb shelters to be cleaned out and prepared. They're not actually too clean, but they were being used for storage for decades. And in one of the last wars, we were ordered to clean them out. And I went down there today with my wife, and there were probably 40 people in the bomb shelter. There was a bunch of people who may not even know it was open or that it was, available. But the last time I was in a bomb shelter was in 1990 during the first Gulf War when Saddam Hussein fired rockets at Israel. And at the time, what we were expecting was poison gas,
Right.
which never materialized. And my wife asked me this morning, she said, "So you've been through other wars. Have you ever seen anything like this?" And I said, "Only on TV."
So tell me, what was it like being in a bomb shelter with 40 other people? What was the mood of the room at the time? What kind of conversations were being had?
I'm going to let my wife answer that because she has a comment here, and I think she maybe is more empathetic than I am. So
I think it was very humbling. I think it was very humbling. There were people there. There were children there. A lot of kids didn't know what was going on. It was. I wasn't afraid because my trust is in Yehovah, and truly, I think that we grow up with that in the church that I grew up with. So I wasn't afraid. If something were to happen, I was very happy I was with Nehemia because he is the love of my life. But it was a very humbling experience to know that there are people that are trying to kill you, and they're close. What's the name of the city? Nehemia, Sderot? Sderot is 40 miles from where we are right now.
And that's a city that had, this morning at least, a Hamas occupation force in part of the city.
Okay.
There were Hamas, what they call technical jeeps, with heavy machine guns on the back, driving through the streets of Sderot, trying to get into people's apartments.
There were people that were posting live on TikTok, as they were hunkered down. There was one lady that had been in a shelter there, and she had been waiting to go to the bathroom, and they were trying not to drink so that they didn't have to go to the bathroom. And she posted this thing, and it just made it really, really, she was like, "I really appreciate you guys all telling me to stay safe. But how am I supposed to stay safe? I can hear gunfire outside of this shelter right now. How am I supposed to stay safe? So unless God keeps you safe, you're not safe." So my heart is with all of the hostages that are being hurt, all of the families that are losing people on both sides, guys. You know what? It's terrible on both sides.
So yeah, there was a report.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thanks, babe. There was a report earlier that there's a whole bunch of people who are in these towns on the border of Gaza. So after 1990, when we had the first Gulf War and they fired rockets at us, Israel passed a law that every new apartment, every new house, every new housing unit had to have a bomb shelter room within the apartment. So my building was built in 1950, doesn't have that. We have a community bomb shelter in the basement. But all the new ones have what they call a mamad, which is a apartment bomb shelter. And they said there's all these reports of people who are in their bomb shelters and they hear voices in their apartments calling out in Hebrew saying it's safe to come out, and they don't know if they're terrorists or the army or police. They don't know. And they probably at this point are terrorists in many instances. Right? They're trying to take more hostages and kill more people. And so there's people who are locked in their bomb shelters and have been. It's 6:30 p.m. almost. They've been locked in their bomb shelter since 6:30 a.m. That's when the rocket attack started. So 12 hours. I mean, it's unprecedented. What's really a shock to a lot of people in Israel is that we've had terrorist attacks before, but the situations are generally resolved within minutes, maybe an hour. This has been going on for 12 hours, and there are armed Hamas units still occupying parts of southern Israel. This hasn't happened before. So what I want to say to the American people is, we need your prayers. We need your support. We need to know that you care. Hamas is doing this for attention. And what they want is for the world to say, put pressure on Israel. Look, Hamas ultimately, there's no negotiating with them. They want Israel to cease to exist. They openly say that. They had a reporter in Kibbutz Be'eri. This is how we know it was completely captured by Hamas. There is a famous reporter who was a Palestinian from Gaza who was reporting live from Kibbutz Be'eri on the border. And he was talking about how they captured these Israeli settlements. Now, settlements is this buzzword that they use in the international media to talk about Jews living in Judea and Samaria.
Right.
By no international convention or concept is Kibbutz Be'eri a settlement. It is sovereign Israeli territory, but Hamas wants Israel to cease to exist. So to them, everything is a settlement. There's no difference to them between some hilltop so-called settlement, which they see as Jews encroaching on their land, or that's how the international community sees it. There's no difference to Hamas between that and a town that's been in Israel since before 1948 and the founding of the state. To them, we're all foreigners, even though we're Jews who come from Judea, we're back in our indigenous homeland. To them, they've convinced themselves we're these foreigners that they have to drive out, and they want us all dead and gone. And I can see that. I can see that, by the way, on my TikTok feed, where the Palestinians come in and they say, "We hope you die. We hope you suffer. Go home." Well, this is the home of millions of Jews. So.
Yeah. So you say, okay, this is a significant. Bibi announced today that Israel is at war. So that means IDF, Israel Defense Forces, are going to be deployed. This is a full-scale type kind of situation. It sounds like when you say war, what does this mean to a non-military Israeli citizen? What does your world look like now going forward? That it's going to. Are there certain there be curfews? What's life going to be like for people, citizens of Israel?
Well, so honestly, the worst part for me is that my two young nephews in their 20s who served for 3 years in combat units, they're going to be called up and they're going to go to fight. They're going to go into Gaza. There's a bunch of inconveniences that, compared to that, I could care less. What I'm really struggling with is my nephew Nitai and my nephew Amir, who are going to go and fight, and they're going to have to kill people, and they might be killed. That's for me. And then there's all those people who've been taken as hostages. Those are the two things that. Those are anything else is So my wife and I were going to go on a vacation tomorrow. Well, that's off. There's no vacations.
I just got confirmation of it.
Oh, they just told you it's canceled?
No, I just got confirmation I got the confirmation. They sent it to us. You're confirmed.
Oh.
And this is up north. This is.
Oh yeah. So can you let them know? All right, whatever. We'll talk about that later. Whatever. Yeah. We're not driving on the roads where the Hamas has called for the Arabs of Israel to rise up and kill all the Jews. Right now, this is an attack from Gaza by Hamas, but they want to pull in other Arabs into this conflict. So it's not a good time to be traveling. People are being told to hunker down.
It's interesting because now, recently, a new political development in Israel is that the Arab political parties have actually been part of the government or participant in the Knesset, and actually were in the previous administration were part of the government. That there was this real attempt, I think, on both sides, maybe, that to try to get the Arabs who are Israeli citizens, in get them involved politically, mainstream. Some people, of course, in your country probably didn't like that, but in other words, there was attempts to get them at the table and be part of the government.
Sure.
And how do you feel like the Arabs who are Israeli citizens have all the rights, right, as citizens of Israel?
Right.
Is there a concern that could happen?
I mean, there's absolutely a concern that some elements within the Arab-Israeli society will decide to cause problems and attack Jews, absolutely. And then on top of that, you have areas where they're not Israeli citizens, where they're ruled by what's called the Palestinian Authority. There's actually two Palestinian states today. There's one in the West Bank, ruled by the Palestinian Authority, and there's a second regime, which is actually at war with the first one, which is the Hamas regime in Gaza. So
Right.
Hamas wants to draw the Palestinian Authority into it, which might happen. And those people aren't Israeli citizens. They rule their own territory. They have their own army, and they could attack. They could invade us as well. About an hour ago, I was on a hilltop with my wife, and there was a fire off in the distance, and it was but one of those fires was on the other side of the border wall between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And I'm in Jerusalem, and I can see that close that I'm looking from a hilltop in Jerusalem, and not 3-4 miles away, probably less than that, I'm looking into Palestinian territory where there's a fire, and we don't know if somebody was burning garbage, which they often do, or if that was some kind of conflict with the Israeli army. I don't know.
Right.
But Hamas wants, they want other people to join in the war with them. Because they want more dead, right? They want as many Arab dead as possible to put pressure on Israel so we cease to exist. That's their goal.
So what about that you have areas they're called settlements outside of, just explain to the community, so we have Israel proper, and then we have these settlements that are outside. Are you hearing from people in those settlements?
Yeah, my sister lives in one of those settlements, right? It's really just a bedroom community of Jerusalem, right? Everybody there drives 10, 20 minutes out or 20 minutes outside the city and works in Jerusalem, right? I mean, so what they call settlements are, we call in America suburbs. What happened is in 1967, we had the 6-Day War. The Arabs, they closed the Straits of Tiran, which is the main maritime access to southern Israel. That is our lifeline. And that was an act of war. And they massed forces on the border to wipe Israel off the map. And we attacked first, and we defeated them. And we liberated, we actually conquered Gaza and the so-called West Bank, or what we call Judea and Samaria. We pulled out of Gaza in 2006, right? So there hasn't been a single Israeli soldier in Gaza since 2006. I remember in 2005 there was an election, and there was this really right-wing political party that was saying, we can't pull out of Gaza. If we pull out of Gaza, they'll start firing rockets at us from Gaza, and it'll lead to destabilization of southern Israel. Well, their worst-case scenario wasn't as bad as what happened today. They were considered you guys are wackadoodles. There's no way that'll happen. You're just paranoid. You're just trying to stir up people to be afraid for some political agenda so you can, get power. That'll never happen. The Arabs in Gaza, we pull out and we'll have peace. They'll never fire at us. No, we've had nonstop rocket attacks since we pulled out. So we don't have any so-called settlements in Gaza anymore. 10,000 Jews lived in Gaza, and they were removed by the Israeli government. Now we have about 200,000 Jews who live in Judea and Samaria, what the Arabs call the West Bank. And look, we see that as our homeland, right? We're Jews that come from Judea, and Abraham lived in these areas that they're calling settlements. And you have to understand the Jewish mentality and history. So in 1795, see, everything goes back a long time. In 1795, probably the majority of the Jews in the world came under the rule of the Russian Empire. Mm-hmm. And the Russians didn't know what to do with the Jews. They didn't have any Jews before that. To them, Jews were Christ killers and shouldn't exist. They should all be wiped out. So they passed a bunch of anti-Semitic laws, and one of those was called the Pale of Settlement. And they said Jews can only live within this narrow band of area. Jews aren't allowed to live in Moscow. They're not allowed to live in St. Petersburg. Only in this small little area. And so
that's where we get the term beyond the pale.
That's exactly where you get it. So we come to our homeland and we're being told there's a pale of settlement. You're not allowed to live in those areas. What do you mean Abraham lived there? I can show you where Abraham buried his wife and where he's buried. Me and my wife were there a few weeks ago. We talked about it on the podcast we did together.
Yeah.
We know where he pitched his tent. Like, what are you talking about? We can't live in our own homeland. So the Jewish perspective is, I mean, we should be able to live anywhere we want. So why are they called settlements? Here's where things get a bit complicated. So the Arabs will say, well, those are occupied territories. And the way Israel looks at those areas is that they're disputed territories. And okay, you say they're, look, we have areas like that all over the world. Western Sahara, Nagorno-Karabakh, right, which just had a war happen, right? So there are areas all over the world that are disputed, and we say these are you dispute that these are yours. We say they're ours. We should be able to live there. Now there are 200,000 Jews living there, and probably a million. I don't know, a million or two Arabs. I don't know, probably 2 million Arabs. I'm guessing. I don't know the exact number. So if we could live in peace with them, great. That would be wonderful, right? There's over a million Arabs living in Israel. Why can't there be 200,000 Jews living in Palestine? Because they would kill all of them, right? So we have this problem that we have 200,000 Jews living in these disputed areas, and the world will say, oh, this is the reason there's no peace. Well, what does it have to do with Gaza? There's no Jews living in Gaza. There haven't been Jews living in Gaza since 2006. So if we pulled out of every Jew out of the West Bank, which we couldn't afford to do, it's 200,000 people. 10,000 people was a major hit to the Israeli economy. 200,000 isn't practical. But let's say we did that, so they would start attacking, Beit Shemesh and Modi'in, right? They wouldn't stop at the border of the West Bank. And how do I know that? Because they didn't stop at the border of Gaza. So there used to be a lot of people in Israel, maybe half the population said, yeah, we should stop the people living in the West Bank, stop the Jews living in the West Bank, and just stick to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and those areas. And now people are like, we tried that with Gaza, it didn't work. So now what will work? I don't know. I want there to be peace. What do we have to do to make peace? I don't know. They don't want peace right now, so it's kind of a hypothetical point. Certainly, the Hamas doesn't want peace.
No, Nehemia, if you don't mind, I in American Christianity in particular, and especially within evangelical Christianity, many people believe that we're living in the last days, and I think many people right now probably think that right after Feast of Tabernacles and all these things that are happening. Rabbi Jonathan Kahn spoke here, and he was talking about the significance of 50 years, and how a lot of things happened 50 years ago that are happening in all this kind of stuff. Now, I'm agnostic when it comes to a lot of this end time stuff, to be perfectly honest with you. Yeah. But how do you view this through the prism of people who believe that we're living in the last days? Like, for instance, I know there are many Jews that believe they're looking for the Messiah to return. Maybe talk about it from an end of days concept.
So I would say Jews are looking for the Messiah to come, not so much return.
Right. That's of course.
And what we're looking for is a descendant of David who will defeat the enemies of Israel, gather in the exiles, and bring peace to the world. That seems like it's something that's way far off.
Right.
We may be heading for a period of suffering and devastation. I don't know. I can tell you that if you were, I did this study a few years back on these documents that were found at Auschwitz. They call them the Scrolls of Auschwitz. What happened is there were Jews whose job it was to collect the bodies out of the gas chambers and burn them. And they did their best to document what they saw because they knew they were going to be killed. And so they wrote these journals and they buried them in the piles of ash. Like one was put in a thermos, and the hope was that when the ash was thrown into the Vistula River, that it would wash down and somebody would find it somewhere. But it said somebody actually found it in Auschwitz. And there's this scene described by one of these Jews who's cleaning the bodies, and he talks about a shipment of Jews who had arrived in a train. I think they were from the Czech Republic, and they were really worried. They were being stripped naked and sent to showers, and people are saying, they're going to kill us all. And this man stands up and he says, Whoever told you that must have some agenda, because the Germans are the most civilized people. They're just going to give us showers and delouse us. Don't worry, they're not going to kill us. Calm down. They'll never do that. And they calmly went to their deaths. So compared to that, we had no one to defend us back then. We had Roosevelt, who was the president, who knew it was happening at Auschwitz. Certainly by 1943 and 44, he knew it was happening at Auschwitz. And he chose, do I bomb, some factory, or do I bomb Auschwitz, the gas chambers at Auschwitz? And he decided, yes. His wife later said that he hated Jews. So we had no one to defend us. At least now we have someone to defend us. We can defend ourselves. And I pray and hope that God is on our side and that we're successful and we defeat these enemies. So Netanyahu said, we're at war and we're going to win this war. And I hope and pray that's true. Is this the end times? I'm skeptical about saying it's the end times because we've been through much worse things.
Yeah,
Can we read a passage from the Bible?
Please. Let's do this. And let me just, as you're looking for that scripture, keep in mind that it was then President Truman who came after Roosevelt, after Roosevelt died. And Truman actually was more sympathetic, I believe, to Israel.
Absolutely.
And just keep in mind, where was Truman from? He was from Independence, Missouri.
Was he really?
Zion. Yeah, Independence, Missouri. From Zion, the place
was he
that
of Mormon descent, or do we know
Nope. But so just so you know, I'm an evangelical Christian, but the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints and many people of the Restoration believe that they'll play a significant role in the end times, Independence, Missouri, as well. Speaking of end of days and stuff like that.
I was just reading this morning, and we had talked privately. It led me to read this morning about Orson Hyde.
Yes,
who was one of the early, I don't know, what would you call him, founders of Mormons?
Absolutely.
To use an Islamic term, he was a companion of the Prophet. So, meaning he was part of the inner circle with Joseph Smith Jr. And in 1841, he came to Jerusalem and climbed the Mount of Olives and offered a prayer for the Jews to return to Israel.
Yep.
And that's actually commemorated, that spot, with a park called Orson Hyde Park. And I was trying to find out what did I freeze?
You're froze, but we can still hear you just fine.
I was trying to find out this morning what the status of that park is, and I wasn't able to actually find out. But it was apparently established in the 70s by the LDS Church.
Yes, 1979 by Spencer W. Kimball. They dedicated the park to and they actually had a plaque that had the dedicatory prayer in both English and in Hebrew, but it was vandalized, so they had replaced it. But yes, there is that Orson Hyde Memorial Park in Jerusalem.
I read that as well. Let me just see if I can. I think I have my Bible software is crashing the computer here.
Oh, that's probably why it's breaking up a little bit. That happens. So
let me close that. I'm opening too many things.
Okay. Well, as we're doing that, folks, just wanted to say that part of what my channel has become, Mormon Book Reviews, is kind of a place for interfaith dialogue. As a matter of fact, I'll be launching a new channel next week called Utah Interfaith Forum, which is tied into the Facebook group that I'm involved in. And I want to invite people from various faith traditions to come on the program to have conversations. Because I do feel, even if you're an atheist, I would hope you'd be supportive of the idea that people who have different religious views can set aside their differences and just have human conversations with each other, not asking you to check your beliefs at the door or to compromise them, but to recognize that, because we believe this within the context of Christianity, and I think many religions, that, we are created in his image, and that we are all God's children, and we are all fellow image bearers. And we actually are we're defiling God every time we do wrong to a fellow image bearer, because we are then, we are basically hating God every time we do harm to another image bearer. Okay? So that's how I look at it too.
So, the Jewish concept is that it says that God created humans in the image of God. And every human being is created in the image of God. And because of that, human life is sacred. Because we're created in the image of God. That's why we don't have the right to kill another human being. I guess there's some situations where you do, right? Where there's, it's interesting in the Ten Commandments in the King James it says, "Thou shalt not kill." In the Hebrew it says, "Lo tirtzach," "Thou shalt not murder."
Right.
So there are some justifications when you're defending yourself, but human life is sacred, and there's the in the book of Jonah it talks about how Jonah was upset because he said 40 days and Nineveh will be destroyed, and then they repented and God didn't destroy Nineveh, and Jonah was upset.
Yeah.
And God says to him, "Look, these are my creations. I don't want them to be destroyed. I want them to repent and live." I'm paraphrasing, of course, right? So let's look at the verse, Daniel 12:1. "At that time, the great prince Michael, who stands beside the sons of your people, will appear. It will be a time of trouble, the like of which has never been since the nation came into being. At that time, your people will be rescued, all who are found inscribed in the book." And let's read the next verse. "Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to eternal life, others to reproaches, to everlasting abhorrence." So I believe verse 2 is talking about the resurrection. And I believe that'll be here on earth. There'll be a resurrection in the future. Well, verse 2 hasn't happened yet, which means verse 1 hasn't happened yet. So there's going to be an event which is the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the people of Israel. And is that this? Well, not yet, and let's hope it doesn't become it. But there will be a really bad event that'll be worse than the Holocaust. And that will precede the resurrection. So, there's kind of this idea. There was, do you know who Chabad is in Judaism? Or Lubavitch, they're also called. So
okay, yeah.
So they're a Jewish movement who emphasizes the coming of the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have a song. "We want Mashiach now. We don't want to wait." And they popularized this. Really started. Well, I remember it in the '80s coming about, and it was kind of a novel thing because the Jews had a false Messiah in 1648 called Shabtai Tzvi, and he eventually, Shabtai Tzvi, this false Messiah, eventually converted to Islam.
Yep.
And it was a great disappointment to the Jews, in Christianity.
And that's the thing. He had a huge following.
Oh, yeah.
This was not an insignificant thing that happened.
He had followers all the way from Amsterdam to Yemen and from Morocco to Iraq. The entire Jewish world, not everybody followed him, but the entire Jewish world had people who followed him. I found this book printed in 1666 in Amsterdam. And it's really interesting. So when they give the date in a Hebrew book, traditionally what they do is they give what's called a chronogram. A chronogram is where Hebrew letters have numerical values. So you give a sentence that adds up to the numbers of that year. Like this year is 5783. So if I gave like 3 or 4 words that if you add up the numbers, they come out to 5783, that would be a chronogram. And so it'll say in the year such and such, right? And it won't say 5,783. It'll give some clever sentence, right? So in this book in 1666, it says, "In the year that the Messiah came." And what's crazy about the book is Shabtai Tzvi converted to Islam about 6 weeks before this book was printed.
Wow.
But they hadn't heard the news in Amsterdam because that happened in Turkey.
Oh.
So imagine when the news arrived a few months later, they're like, "Oh, this is not good. We don't look good here." So it was a great disappointment. So Jews didn't talk about the Messiah after, in Christianity, there was the great disappointment in the 19th century, right?
1844 with the Millerites. Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And so there was a great disappointment in Judaism in 1666. And it was unacceptable to talk about the Messiah because that leads to persecution and suffering and apostasy, which it did in 1666. All of those happened. And so in the 80s, Chabad tried to revive this and with the song, "We want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait." But look what happens when Messiah comes. According to Daniel 12:1, there's assuming that Messiah and resurrection is the same thing, right? Maybe they're not. But I kind of assume they'll coincide, which I could be wrong. But if they do, then that shouldn't be something we're looking forward to, kind of. I don't know. And on the one hand, I'm looking forward to Isaiah 2 and Micah 4, where they beat their swords into plowshares and we have world peace. But that will be preceded by great suffering. Look, this has been the worst day for the people of Israel and the Jewish people since 1973. This is the greatest tragedy that's happened to us in 73. We don't even know the full extent of it, right? We know there's dozens of hostages. We don't know, are those actually hostages or are those dead bodies that they have taken to pretend they have hostages? We don't know. It's happening.
I've been hearing reports that they're defiling the bodies of dead Jewish people.
Oh, there was a soldier that they mutilated his body in the street, that they murdered him. Yeah, mutilated his body.
And I heard it was also happened to a woman's body as well. I heard on CNN earlier this morning. So we're seeing a level of depravity in carnage, pure wickedness and evil occurring, and just to see this war that's happening now in real time. I just, of course, I woke up this morning, I saw the headline on Drudge Report, and I messaged you, and then next thing you know, we're taping this. I haven't even had breakfast yet. I'm still wearing my undershirt that I slept in, but I felt like, okay, we need to have this conversation because the people, I grew up, basically most of my life believing we lived in the last days, that was kind of my world that I grew up in. In the 1970s, the best-selling book of all time was The Late Great Planet Earth, written by Hal Lindsey. And for a lot of Christians in America, they look very closely at events in Israel, and they really are looking for signs here. And so this speaks to a evangelical audience, I remember when the first Gulf War happened and being worried that we were going to, this could be the end of days. So all these things I can resonate with. And of course, you have a similar parallel where, you were actually in Israel when this was all in 1990. You've experienced all these things, stuff like that. And so there's this deep connection that a lot of Christians in America have with the Jewish people. And, I think it's really important, though, that this is the thing. This is the thing. We believe in God.
Last days, and this could be the beginning of a much greater tragedy that happens, or maybe not. Right? I mean,
it could.
We could come up with a whole bunch of scenarios that it escalates, and Iran actually has thermonuclear weapons, and they fire them, and they kill 5-6 million Israelis. That could absolutely happen. I hope and pray it doesn't. And then Israel responds by nuking, Tehran and Isfahan and whatever the major cities are over there. All of that could absolutely happen. I hope it doesn't. I pray it doesn't. I think it's probably not. We don't want it to escalate beyond southern Israel and Gaza, but it might. And that's why we want people. I ask people to pray that it does not escalate, and that the hostages are released, and this ends soon with as little death as possible.
Yeah, that this de-escalates, because basically, if this continues, I mean, folks, Gaza gets taken over by Israel again. I mean,
Israel's definitely going to go into Gaza in some capacity. I don't know what. I guess I don't know. I'm not consulted, right? But I would be shocked if there wasn't an Israeli incursion into Gaza to root out the terrorist leaders. So Israel has this idea of deterrence. And so what they're thinking right now, I would imagine, is we have to the deterrence is gone, right? They've done essentially a 9/11 scale event. And how do you reestablish deterrence? Well, you make them pay a really heavy price. And what's a really heavy price? It's not going to be pretty. It's definitely they're going to go after all the terrorists and try to capture or kill as many of them as they can. With the hostages that they have, we're going to take as many prisoners of war as we can, perhaps in the hope of exchanging them. I don't really know. It's bad. This is bad.
So Do we know if I remember there were incursions previously where there was a lot of attacks done by tunnels that they had dug? Do we
Yeah,
know if
there have
tunnels?
been border skirmishes where, like, you had a few guys come in, right? What we
Yeah.
don't know is that so here's what we know for sure. There are videos of them coming in on motorized gliders.
Oh
There are
yeah.
videos of them coming in on speedboats. There are videos of them taking not a bulldozer, a backhoe, and knocking down sections of the border gate between Israel and Gaza, and then blowing up other sections, and then driving in on trucks and motorcycles. So they came by air, land, and sea, which means this was a highly coordinated, heavily planned event. This wasn't that somebody woke up and something escalated, right? This is something they've been planning for months. And there were been a bunch of protests on the border. And the belief is that those protests were to cover when the attack actually came. We wouldn't be surprised because they're there to protest. Instead, they came and they didn't protest. They blew up the border wall with explosives, and then came with a backhoe and took down sections of the border wall. There was a
So the question people are going to have, right, early days, early hours, and this whole thing happened is, how does something like this go unnoticed? Or there what could like how could this coordinating happen right under the nose of the IDF and the
So
intelligence
it's an absolute
Mossad?
failure of Israeli intelligence, that's for sure. People are going to be fired, and as a result of this, but right now we're not worrying about that. Right
Right.
now, they keep saying in the Israeli sources there'll be a day of reckoning where this is all sorted out. But right now we have to stop what's going on. Right now is not the
Yeah.
time to fire people. Now is the time to
Well, they're forming a government. Did you see that?
I didn't know they're forming a unity government.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, so now we
That's
have
a
what is
big
called
deal.
unity government. That's very important. So
They said we're putting it aside.
Oh my God, that's a really big deal.
yeah, so explain to them why that's a big deal.
So Israel has a proportional representative democracy where, in the U.S. you vote for the president, and hopefully your votes are counted or they're not counted, right? That's a different this question, right? But you vote, and then you have you vote. Do you want that guy to be president or not pre-president, right? If he gets the majority of the electoral college, right? Maybe it's not a perfect system, but that's how it works. Then he becomes the president. In Israel, we have a system that comes from England, and the British system, you vote for a party. Although it's the British is a hybrid system, which we don't have.
Yeah, it's a hybrid, but basically
Right.
you're just voting for the party,
So in
and then
Israel,
the
you only
percentage
vote
of the
for the
vote
party.
you get,
Right.
then that's representative in the. You got to get a minimum threshold of a
Right,
percentage, but
right.
basically they break it down
So
so
if
that
you have
it, like
12%, let's say the Arabs have 12 seats, right?
Yep.
Well, that's because they got 10% of the vote. And
Right.
and there's 120 seats, so they got 10% of the seats, something like that, right? I don't know exactly.
Right.
Right, because there's multiple Arab parties, so maybe whatever, right? But somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% they got, right? So nobody ever gets a majority because there's a lot of small parties, so you have to form a coalition. We've been split down the middle for years. There've been like 5 elections or something.
Yeah.
My sisters, who all voted in all the previous, 3 of my sisters live in Israel, and they voted in the last 5 elections, all 3 of them. And I said to them, you should get a free coffee after the 10th one, right? Like one of those little punch cards, right? That you used to have at the coffee shop. So there's been a party that's been really critical, a bunch of parties really critical of the ruling parties, and partly because they have a whole bunch of Israeli politics things, right? Like deals with the ultra-Orthodox.
right.
Let's see. So anyway, so they are forming the government, or he's calling for government
He's calling for
so
an
we
emergency
don't.
government.
So we don't know if the government.
Oh, it hasn't
hasn't
officially
actually been formed, but
Yeah.
Okay,
But-
but if that happens, that means all the governments united in one. It's
Right.
it's no longer like an opposition party.
You
It's
only
all
do
like-
that when there's all-out war.
Yeah,
When
and
there's
that's probably going to happen.
When there's an extreme crisis is when you do that, and this is without the unity government. We know this is an extreme crisis. Like I said, Israel hasn't been invaded since 1973. So, and yeah, there have been incursions with, small bands of terrorists. That's absolutely happened, but nothing on this scale where like a city was captured. That's never happened before. That hasn't happened since 1949.
Right. Yeah.
That's
So unprecedented things happening
yeah,
in Israel. Um, and I just want to say that, like I said before, in the community in which I live, there are many people right now that are praying for your
we
people.
appreciate
And I
that.
think that's when you had asked Nehemia that the people here in America and throughout the world,
Yeah,
that we all pray for our brothers and sisters in Israel. And that we also, one of the things I wanted to say too is remember, God is in control. We believe that. And so we also have to realize is that, even in times of hopelessness, we still have our Creator who is ultimately our King, our ruler, and he'll. It's all part of His. What do we say? His plan? We don't know. We can't even know the mind of God. So it's impossible to even understand, to comprehend Him and everything like that. But I think what we do, we can all do our small parts as all members of the human community to help bring about peace as best we can, and recognize that the futility sometimes of what we do, but also realize that there are good things that humanity is capable of doing, that we are capable of getting at the table and having peace conversations with each other, and that there has been progress that's been made in the Middle East. And then that's really the reality, is that this is pushback against the great progress that has been made in the Middle East over the past few years, starting really with the Trump administration, and just unprecedented peace treaties that have been signed with all these Arab and Muslim majority countries that recognize Israel and everything like that. This could also be a last ditch attempt by Hamas and these groups to try to stop this. This could actually be the beginning of the end of these groups as well. We also have to keep that in mind, that they may have,
yeah.
So there's a lot of different.
So. I hope this is the end of Hamas, but I doubt it. But that would be good if it was the end of Hamas. They're an evil organization. It's kind of strange that they say Israel is occupies Gaza, which is a complete mythology. We don't have it up until now. We haven't had a single soldier in Gaza. We're gonna because of this. Hopefully not long term. But what we do is we control what comes in their border, so they don't bring in heavy weapons and tanks and aircraft and fighter jets and stuff. Well, but they have a second border, which is a border with Egypt, and Egypt also blocks what comes into Gaza. And do you know why that is? Because Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is an extremist organization that is a threat to the government of Egypt. And so hence Hamas is a threat to the government of Egypt. So the evil Jews stop free trade coming into Gaza. Well, so did the Egyptians, right? Because the Egyptians are concerned that elements from Gaza would get into Egypt with whatever was imported into Gaza, and then undermine the stability of their country. So they're a bad organization, Hamas. They're evil, and I hope they cease to exist soon. But I don't know.
Right. Well, and then again, too, is that the story of the Jewish people, the story of Israel, the Exodus and the persecution, and also the great, just the diaspora. Then you were thrown out of your homeland for a very long period of time. Your temple gets destroyed in 70 A.D. You are a resilient people who have seen the worst, but also are capable of doing great things, great and mighty things, when you consider even the 6-Day War should have been on paper the annihilation of your people.
Yep.
And instead, you actually literally almost extended your borders to the original promised land that's described in the Bible, and so you had this thing where, but yet you guys didn't occupy those lands. You gave them back, and maybe, in many cases, like you had the Sinai Peninsula and everything like that, from Egypt. So it's really remarkable. So you could almost see how, as tragedy and as horrible as this has all been, no doubt, that there's this ability for the Jewish people to bounce back from from near annihilation with the Shoah and all these things, and then then you go back to Israel and you make the desert bloom again.
Yeah,
that's the remarkable story of your people.
So no, you're right, and that gives me hope. Even though right now there's really, it's really I think everyone in Israel right now is in a place of despair because, it really is a 9/11 scale event.
Yeah.
It may be in some ways worse than 9/11.
Yeah.
Not to minimize 9/11, which was a horrible event. We actually don't know exactly what the scale of this is yet. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, because it's ongoing. It's happening in real
ongoing. We
time.
don't know if hundreds of people have been captured or killed, right? Right now they're saying something like 100 are dead, and it seems like about 100 have been taken, but it could be 1,000 that are dead. We don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine in a
Yeah,
country
typically when you have these events happening, the early numbers are never really accurate compared to what we see. You know,
we know
we'll
that,
know.
right? They're saying
Yeah.
that. They're saying this is what we have confirmed and what we're allowed to
Yeah.
announce, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's bad. Please pray. That's all I can, ask.
Well, Nehemia, you and I have become close and fast friends here.
Yeah.
And I do think that this was meant to be, to have these conversations and to have this friendship with you. And I want to say I'm very grateful for you giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. My friend, before we wrap this up, was there anything else that you wanted to get out there? Anything else you wanted to say to your audience?
Just, pray for Israel, pray for the hostages, pray for the soldiers, and, pray that this ends as quickly as possible with as little death and devastation as possible. That's what I ask. Yeah. So.
And this is the thing. So let's do this. Let's keep this conversation with you and I. Let's keep communicating with each other. So if you feel the need we want to go back on and continue this conversation.
Sure.
If there's any breaking news or anything you want to get out, I'll hop on at any time. You just give me a few minutes, and I'll hop on, and we'll continue this dialogue. We'll give updates. And Nehemiah, I always have to mess up your name sometimes, but I love you, brother.
Yeah.
But again, this is I just want to encourage everybody to pray for Israel. We love the Jewish people here in America, and support them any way that you can. Again, I do appreciate the privilege and the honor of coming on your program to have this conversation with you. And let's just get the word out, folks. Pray for Israel. Pray for the Jewish people, and also just remember too that God is in control.
Amen.
And
all right.
all
Thanks,
right.
Stephen. It was good
Peace.
talking to you.
Shalom, my friend.
Shalom.
I love you, my brother.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. We have to
It's
stop
frozen here.
streaming here. Hold on.